Hello, welcome to the Haunted Storybook. Before we get to the video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you. Story 1. Autumn arrived in Maplewood Hollow like an old secret, whispering through amber leaves and rattling across the rooftops. The town, nestled in a valley where fog clung to chimneys and the scent of apples filled the air, seemed unchanged in the 20 years since Lydia Graves had last walked its cracked sidewalks. She had returned not by choice, but by necessity. After the death of her estranged grandmother, Lydia had inherited the old family home, a house so tucked into the woods that sunlight barely touched its sagging roof. The townspeople had warned her, gently but firmly, that the hollow was no place for young women to stay alone. Still, she came. On her first night, after unpacking boxes and setting a kettle to boil, Lydia wandered into the attic. It smelled of mothballs and forgotten paper. There, in the far corner, resting atop an old trunk, was a single envelope addressed in her grandmother's shaky handwriting. For when the voices begin. Her heart tapped against her ribs. Inside the envelope, one iron key, and a note written in hurried scrawl. Lock the red door before the fog comes in. Don't trust the girl in the mirror. And never answer if she knocks twice. Lydia stared at the message. Downstairs, the kettle began to scream. The kettle's whistle cut through the silence like a warning. Lydia hurried down the attic stairs, the envelope still clenched in her hand. As she turned off the stove, the old house seemed to exhale, timbers creaked, walls popped, and a gentle thud came from somewhere upstairs. She stood still, listening. Silence. Shaking off the unease, she poured herself a cup of tea and tried to convince herself the note was just a product of her grandmother's declining mind. Superstition. A leftover from lonely years spent in an old house too far from the world. But the phrase clung to her. Lock the red door before the fog comes in. Later, exploring the house with a flashlight, Lydia found it. At the end of the narrow hallway upstairs, behind a faded tapestry, was a door she didn't remember from childhood. Tall. Wooden. Painted deep red like dried blood. The iron key from the envelope sat heavy in her pocket. She hesitated. The handle was ice cold. Slowly, she slid the key into the lock and turned it. Click. The door opened inward just an inch. Inside was darkness. And cold. She swung it open further. A narrow, windowless room stretched beyond, no larger than a pantry. The walls were covered in old, yellowed newspaper clippings. Names circled in red ink. Phrases like, whispered in the woods, and, hollow birth's curse, stood out. In the center of the floor was a trapdoor, sealed shut with rusted bolts. She stepped back. Behind her, the hallway light flickered. Then, 2 knocks. Loud. Sudden. Knock. Knock. At the front door. Her blood froze. Not 3 knocks. Not 1. 2. Just like the note said. She turned slowly toward the stairs, heart pounding. And the silence answered her. Lydia crept down the stairs, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The front door stood silent, its glass pane fogged by the mist pressing against it from outside. No figure stood there. No sound followed. But she didn't move closer. 2 knocks. That's what the note had warned her about. Not to answer. Not to look. Not to let them in. Instead, she turned and made her way into the parlor. The room had changed little since her childhood, floral wallpaper, antique furniture, books lined neatly on shelves. The fireplace was cold, though soot streaks suggested it had been used recently. She stood in front of the large mirror above the mantel. And froze. Her reflection stared back, but something was wrong. It was smiling. Lydia wasn't. She raised a hand. The reflection followed. She tilted her head. The reflection matched her. But that smile, thin, Too wide, too knowing, never faded. The lights flickered. And then her reflection spoke, though her lips never moved. Don't answer the third knock. Lydia stumbled backward, knocking over a vase that shattered on the floor. The noise startled her more than the words. Her heart pounded in her chest, thunderous and disoriented. She looked back at the mirror. Her reflection was normal again. Pale, wide-eyed, scared. But the smile still lingered in the air, like perfume. Lydia left the parlor and returned upstairs, locking the red door tight behind her. The house groaned as she twisted the iron key. She shoved the dresser against it for good measure. She didn't sleep. She sat in bed with the covers pulled tight around her, every light in her room on. And then, around 3 a.m., when the wind outside had finally stilled, she heard it again. Knock. Knock. This time. From the mirror. Lydia didn't move. She couldn't. The knocks echoed from the mirror like soft heartbeats, slow and deliberate. There was no one in the room but her, and yet the mirror waited. She couldn't see anything on the other side but her own reflection, flickering in the lamplight, drawn and pale. When nothing followed the knocks, she rose slowly from the bed, heart thudding with every cautious step. She reached into her bedside drawer and pulled out the note again. Don't trust the girl in the mirror. Never answer if she knocks twice. But she had already heard the second knock. Twice now. This time from the wrong place. Her breath quickened. She grabbed the iron key from her nightstand, shoved it into her coat pocket, and headed back toward the red door. If something wanted her attention, it would find it behind that door, or below it. The hallway was darker now. The bulbs had dimmed to a sickly orange glow. Dust floated like ash. The red door creaked as she moved the dresser aside. Locked. Still locked. She twisted the key, and the bolt snapped back with a groan. The door opened more easily this time, as though something had been waiting for it. The newspaper-covered walls were just as she remembered, but the trapdoor in the center of the floor was humming. A deep, low vibration passed through the soles of her feet. Lydia stepped closer and knelt. Her hand hovered above the rusted iron ring that served as a handle. From behind the door came a whisper, not words at first, just a rhythm, a breath, like someone reciting something too old to remember clearly. Then. Downstairs, we remember you. She yanked her hand back. Her flashlight flickered and went out. And in the blackness, she heard what sounded like small, wet feet pattering across the ceiling above her bedroom. Lydia backed out of the red room, pulling the door closed with shaking hands. The iron key clicked sharply in the lock, but it did little to ease the ice crawling up her spine. What she'd heard under the trapdoor wasn't her imagination. It had whispered. It had known her. She returned to her bedroom, cautiously, listening for more sounds overhead. But the house was still again. The pattering had stopped. No more whispers. No more knocks. But outside. The fog had arrived. Thick, pale tendrils curled around the windows and doors like fingers trying to pry their way in. Lydia pressed her hand to the cold glass. She couldn't see the front porch anymore. The maple trees out front had vanished into the white. And then she saw it. A shape. Faint and far, just at the edge of visibility, standing in the middle of the fog-choked yard. It was a girl. Small. Still. Facing the house. Lydia stepped back quickly. The reflection of the window caught her movement, and the girl in the fog smiled through the glass. She was inside the reflection but not in the world. Lydia fled from the window, drawing the curtains tight. Lock the red door before the fog comes in. The warning circled in her head like a chant. She had locked it. But was it enough? She turned to check the hallway, and froze. Footprints. Wet ones. They trailed across the wooden floor, leading from the parlor, to the bottom of the stairs. And they were too small to be her own. She backed up slowly, heart hammering. Then came the third knock. Not from the mirror. Not from the front door. From under the floorboards. Lydia dropped to her knees, pressing one ear to the wood. Silence. But not the safe kind. It was a watching silence, one that felt like holding your breath in the dark, waiting for something to breathe back. Then, faintly, it came again. Knock. 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 Directly beneath her. 3 deliberate strikes. This time slow. Confident. Then, a whisper. Barely audible, but clear. Lydia, come down now. She staggered back, her pulse roaring in her ears. That voice, it had said her name. Spoken it like it belonged to her, like it had been carrying it all this time. The trapdoor. Her instincts screamed to run, but something about the voice rooted her to the spot. Not terror, not completely. There was something familiar in it. She lit a lantern, her flashlight had gone cold, and made her way again to the red door, which pulsed faintly with heat. When she unlocked it this time, she didn't pause. She descended into the small, paper-covered room, stepping over the floor's center. The trapdoor was warm now. Breathing. Lydia knelt. Her hand trembled as it touched the iron ring. It lifted easily. Beneath was a short, narrow staircase leading down into blackness. The air that rushed out smelled of damp stone and rose petals long decayed. And far below, a voice humming. A lullaby. Off-key. Broken. She took one step down. Then another. Lantern held high, she whispered into the dark. Who are you? The humming stopped. The voice answered, soft and clear. Don't you remember, Lydia? You made me. The stairs twisted like roots beneath the house, each step older than the last. The walls dripped with moisture, and the air pressed tightly around Lydia's chest, thick with the scent of mildew and something sweeter, like paper soaked in ink. The lantern flickered. She reached the bottom and stepped into a chamber lined wall to wall with books. No, not books. Journals. Hundreds of them, bound in mismatched leather, stacked on sagging shelves and crumbling tables. The room seemed endless, though the ceiling hung low, and the walls curved inward like a womb. On the far side sat a rocking chair. And in it, a woman. Or what had once been one. Her skin was paper pale and cracked like old parchment. Her hair hung in matted curls down her back. She didn't look up, but rocked slowly, humming the broken lullaby Lydia had heard on the stairs. On the floor beside her sat a single journal, newer than the rest. The cover was forest green, embossed with a maple leaf. Lydia's heart dropped. It was hers. Her childhood journal, the one she had filled with stories, drawings, dreams. She picked it up. Every page had been rewritten, the handwriting not hers anymore. Names she didn't recognize had been inserted. Whole chapters added in red ink. The entries twisted and rewritten, characters made cruel, endings warped into warnings. You wrote us, the woman croaked suddenly. Her head turned slightly, but her eyes remained hidden by her hair. We listened. Lydia stepped back, clutching the journal. Who are you? The rocking stopped. I am the pages you never burned. I'm every story you told to no one but the dark. The walls groaned. Some of the books on the shelves began to open themselves, their pages flapping like wings, revealing sketches of hollow-eyed children and forests that bled. Then, from somewhere behind her, came a whisper. Lydia, you're dreaming again. She spun around. No one there. But when she turned back, the woman in the chair was gone. The rocking had stopped. And in her place sat a mirror. Covered in dust. Lydia approached it slowly. There was no reflection. Only a shadow standing behind the glass, smiling wider than a human face should allow. And then it raised a hand. And knocked. Once. Twice. 3 times. The knocking echoed deep into the marrow of Lydia's bones, 3 soft, measured strikes, muffled by the glass but still sharp enough to send her reeling a step backward. The mirror stood silent again, as if nothing had happened. But the figure inside still smiled. Too wide. Its head tilted slightly, slowly, in perfect time with the flicker of the lantern's flame, like it could hear her thoughts and was amused by them. She wanted to run. But the mirror held her. Her hand trembled as she lifted it, almost in reflex, to touch the glass. The shadow inside mimicked her, still smiling. But just as her fingers grazed the cold surface, words appeared, scratched into the mirror from the inside, each letter forming slowly, as if carved by invisible nails. Say my name. Beneath the sentence, the glass began to crack, veins of silvered glass spiderwebbing outward. Lydia stumbled back, journal still in hand. It fell open at her feet. The pages flipped by themselves, faster and faster, until one stopped cold. Page 73. She had drawn something there, years ago. A crude sketch of a girl with hollow eyes and long black hair. Beneath it, a name she didn't remember writing. Mireia. The lantern sputtered. The mirror whined. And the figure inside nodded once. Then its lips moved. And Lydia heard the voice, not aloud, but in her own head. Now I can leave. The mirror shattered. But it didn't fall. No shards, no crash. The glass simply vanished, like a curtain pulled back, and the space behind it was no longer a wall, but a hallway. Dark. Damp. Familiar. It looked just like the one in her grandmother's attic, but somehow stretched, twisting inward. At the end stood Mireia. Lydia couldn't see her face anymore. Only the long arms. The crooked neck. The smile that remained long after her head tilted forward. Come finish the story, Mireia whispered. We're so tired of waiting. And the hallway behind her opened wide, like a mouth about to speak. Lydia stepped through the broken mirror frame. Her breath caught. She expected cold stone or rotting wood, some foul basement behind the wall, but what met her instead was forest. A narrow path wound through tall trees made entirely of paper. Their trunks were rolls of yellowing parchment, and their leaves whispered as they rustled, soft voices in a dozen languages murmuring at once. Each leaf bore a different phrase or name, written in her own childhood handwriting. She stood among them, stunned. This was no place that should exist. And yet, deep inside, it felt familiar. Mireia, she called softly. The trees responded, not with words, but with a sudden breeze, sharp and dry, that scattered loose leaves across the trail. The air tasted like forgotten ink and dust. She followed the path, guided by instinct and fear, deeper into the forest of her own forgotten creations. Occasionally, she saw glimpses of stories among the trees. A boy with glass eyes kneeling beside a black pond. A woman with no mouth singing lullabies. A child made of buttons holding a lantern that glowed with heartbeat light. Each of them looked at her. Each one whispered. Finish me. She walked faster. Eventually, the path opened into a clearing. At its center stood a tree unlike the others, black as burned wood, with bark covered in ash and symbols drawn in blood-red ink. Beneath it stood Mireia. She was taller now. Her limbs too long. Her shadow stretched like a spider's legs across the paper ground. You left them all behind, she said. Lydia tried to speak, but Mireia continued, voice calm but sharp. Every story you told in that attic, every nightmare scribbled in the margins, this is where they went. We waited. We watched. Lydia trembled. I didn't know. Mireia's head tilted. You did know. You just stopped writing. The black tree creaked above them. One of its branches bent down, revealing a noose made of knotted story thread, ink-stained and pulsing. "You can leave," Mireia whispered, "but only if you write us one last ending." Lydia took a step back. Behind her, the forest closed. Lydia's voice came out hoarse. "An ending? What kind of ending?" Mireia didn't blink. Her expression, if you could still call it that, remained fixed in that unreadable, knowing smile. Behind her, the blackened tree cracked as it grew taller, roots pushing deeper into the paper earth. The noose swayed gently in the air, like it was breathing. "You already wrote it once," Mireia said. "But you erased it. You didn't like how it ended." "I was a child," Lydia whispered. "I didn't know what I was writing." Mireia's smile widened. "Exactly. That's why it was true." The air around them pulsed. From the forest edge came a flickering light, floating pages. Dozens of them. Torn from journals. Some with her name scrawled at the top. Others with scenes she only half remembered. A girl lost in the snow. A door that opened into nothing. A brother who never came back from the orchard. And now, they circled her like birds, slowly narrowing in. "You can change it again," Mireia said, almost kindly. "But you'll have to stay here. To tend the roots. To make sure the stories don't rot." Lydia shook her head. "That's not how stories work." "No," Mireia whispered, stepping closer, "that's not how life works." "But this?" She gestured around the forest. "This is your story. Every time you forgot a dream, a name, a whispered thought, we grew stronger." The noose dropped lower. The ending tree groaned like it remembered every lost word. Lydia reached into her coat pocket, and found her grandmother's iron key. It pulsed warm. Alive. Her hand closed tight around it. "I'm not staying." Mireia's expression darkened. "You can't leave." The forest hushed. Not a whisper. Not a breath. Only the distant sound of something dragging itself across dry leaves. Behind Lydia, one of the ink-drenched creatures stepped from between the trunks, a boy with candle eyes, mouth sewn shut. And another. A girl stitched from newspaper, crying ink. They were all here now. All her unfinished stories. And they were hungry for an ending. Lydia's grip on the iron key tightened. The creatures edged closer, their hollow eyes burning with silent demand. The noose swung slowly, like a pendulum counting down the moments. But she remembered the note. "Lock the red door before the fog comes in." The key pulsed in her palm as if urging her to act. With a sudden burst of courage, Lydia turned away from Mireia and the encroaching shadows. She sprinted back along the winding path, the whispering paper trees clawing at her coat and hair. The floating pages tore at her skin like cold fingers. She burst through the mirror frame, the glass sealing itself behind her with a crack that echoed through the house. The attic was empty, silent but for the faint rustle of leaves drifting in through the cracked window. The red door waited, calm and unmoving. Lydia shoved the dresser aside, her hands trembling as she inserted the key. As the lock clicked shut, the fog outside surged, pressing against the windows and walls like a living thing desperate to break in. But the red door held. The house sighed, settling into stillness. Behind her, the attic trunk was closed tight, the envelope with its warnings tucked safely inside once more. Lydia exhaled, the weight of the story lifting from her chest. The creatures, the forgotten stories, remained trapped in the forest of her imagination, no longer able to claim her. She realized then that endings aren't always about closing doors. Sometimes, they're about locking the right ones. And this time, Lydia Graves was ready to write the ending herself. The next morning, Maplewood Hollow awoke to sunlight piercing through the fog. Inside the old house, the red door stood silent. And Lydia poured herself a cup of tea, finally free from the voices, and ready to begin anew. Story 2. Raven's Ridge sat perched atop a craggy hill, overlooking a valley wrapped in morning mist. The town's weathered streets curled like veins through clusters of dark pine trees, and its buildings leaned close, as if sharing hushed secrets. At the edge of town stood the old Ashcroft estate, a sprawling mansion abandoned for decades, its windows staring blank and cracked. Jonah Calder had returned to Raven's Ridge for the first time since he was a boy. The letter arrived without warning, a single sheet of yellowed paper, written in his mother's looping hand. "Come home. There are things you need to know before it's too late." He hadn't wanted to come back. Raven's Ridge held memories he buried deep, his father's disappearance, the whispered rumors of a curse, and the cold silence that followed. But now, standing before the iron gates of Ashcroft, Jonah felt the weight of the past pressing down like the thick fog swirling around his feet. The gate creaked as he pushed it open, the sound breaking the stillness like a shiver. The gravel driveway stretched toward the house, lined with ancient oaks whose twisted branches clawed at the sky. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and forgotten dust. The grand staircase groaned under his boots as he ascended, each step stirring motes of light from the heavy gloom. Jonah's flashlight caught the glint of something on the landing, a tarnished silver locket. He picked it up, feeling its cold smoothness against his palm. A soft sound echoed from the far end of the hall, a faint melody, like a lullaby carried on the wind. He followed it to a door partially ajar. Inside, a nursery frozen in time. A rocking chair moved slowly by itself, creaking in rhythm with the haunting song. Jonah's breath hitched. The walls were lined with faded photographs, smiling children, pale faces with eyes too dark, too knowing. On a dusty shelf sat a music box. Its lid was open, spinning a haunting tune that filled the room. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him. The air grew thick, heavy with silence and something else, something watching. From the shadows, a whisper. "Jonah." The voice was soft, almost tender, yet dripping with sorrow. He spun around, heart pounding, but the room was empty. The lullaby slowed, then stopped. Jonah's flashlight flickered and died. In the dark, cold fingers brushed his arm. He screamed, stumbling back. The door creaked open. Outside, the fog had thickened, swallowing the moonlight. He raced down the stairs, clutching the locket. But as he reached the front door, it slammed shut before him. The whispers multiplied, swirling around his head like a storm. "Finish the song, or stay forever." Jonah realized then, the past wasn't done with him. The curse of Raven's Ridge wasn't just a story. It was waiting. And it was hungry. Jonah pounded on the front door, desperate to escape the suffocating darkness that had swallowed the mansion. The whispers rose into a cacophony, voices overlapping, pleading, warning, begging. "Finish the song, or stay forever." His fingers curled tightly around the silver locket. He remembered the lullaby, the melody that had played in the nursery. Maybe that was the key. He pulled open the locket. Inside was a tiny music note etched on a faded photograph of a young girl with dark eyes, his sister, Lily, who had vanished when they were children. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. Clutching the locket, Jonah found the music box in the nursery again. He wound the key and, with shaking hands, began to sing. The lullaby flowed from his lips, trembling but true. As the music filled the room, the air shifted, the oppressive fog thinning, the whispers softening. The rocking chair slowed, then stopped. In the mirror above the dresser, a pale figure appeared, Lily. Her eyes held sorrow and relief. "Thank you," she whispered. The door unlocked with a click. Jonah rushed outside. The fog retreated, revealing the familiar outline of Raven's Ridge bathed in pale dawn light. For the first time in years, the town felt alive. He looked back once. The Ashcroft estate stood silent, the curse lifted, the whispers at peace. Jonah held the locket close. Some stories demand endings. And this was finally his. Story 3. The town of Greymoor had been erased from most maps, its name whispered only by the oldest travelers who claimed the place was cursed. Nestled between jagged cliffs and dense woods, the town was swallowed by mist so thick it seemed alive, crawling like smoke through every crevice, every broken window. Evelyn Harper arrived just as twilight bled into night, her car's headlights cutting through the gray haze. She wasn't here for the charm. Greymoor was her inheritance, a parcel of land left to her by a grandmother she barely knew. The townsfolk had warned her, the land was not for the living. But Evelyn was stubborn. She had lost much already. This place was all she had. The house waited at the end of a cracked lane, half hidden beneath tangled ivy and ancient oaks. It leaned against the fog, silent and watchful. Inside, the air was cold and smelled faintly of earth and decay. The floorboards groaned beneath her steps as she explored, uncovering remnants of a lifelong past, a cracked porcelain doll, faded photographs pinned to the wall, a rusted key hanging on a nail. That night, as Evelyn lay in bed, the mist seeped in through the cracked window, curling around her like a living thing. She heard whispers, soft, urgent, calling her name. Sleep came reluctantly, but the dreams were worse than the waking silence. She dreamt of the town in its prime, bustling streets, children laughing, lanterns glowing against a velvet sky. But beneath the joy, a darkness pulsed, a shadow moving just out of sight, a melody of sorrow and warning carried on the wind. When she awoke, a note lay on the floor beside her bed, written in delicate script. Find the well. Listen to the silence. Confused but driven, Evelyn wrapped herself in a coat and stepped outside. The fog thickened, swallowing the world beyond her lantern's glow. Following the whispers, she found the town's old square, cracked cobblestones overrun with weeds, a rusted fountain cracked and dry. At its center stood the well, gaping and black. She peered over the edge. Silence. But then, from the depths, a faint sound rose, a slow, steady tapping. Evelyn leaned closer. A voice, distant and hollow, whispered, "Remember." She staggered back, heart pounding. The tapping became footsteps, echoing all around her. From the mist emerged figures, ghostly, translucent, faces blurred by time, eyes glowing faintly. One stepped forward, a woman in tattered clothes, her mouth moving but no sound escaping. Evelyn understood. They were trapped. Their stories lost. The well was a prison, a wound in the earth swallowing the town's history, its voices, its truths. Evelyn knew what she had to do. She descended a narrow path behind the well, leading to a cavern beneath the town. There, walls carved with ancient symbols glowed faintly. She found a tome, leather-bound, heavy with dust. Opening it, she saw names and stories, lives erased by fear and silence. She began to read aloud, each word breaking chains, setting echoes free. The ghosts gathered closer, smiles growing, light returning to their eyes. But as the last story was spoken, a chill swept the cavern. A shadow darker than the rest whispered, "Not all want to be freed." The ground trembled. Evelyn ran, chased by whispers and cold fingers. She burst from the cavern into dawn's first light. Greymoor breathed again. The fog lifted. The ghosts faded into peace. Evelyn stood alone, clutching the tome. She understood now, some legacies must be remembered to live, but others must be guarded, or darkness will rise. She closed the book and vowed to protect the stories, to keep the balance. Greymoor was no longer a forgotten town. It was a living echo. And Evelyn Harper was its keeper. The dawn stretched thin across the hills, painting the sky in pale washes of pink and gold. Evelyn stood at the edge of Greymoor's square, the heavy tome pressed against her chest. The fog that had once swallowed the town was now retreating like a tide, pulling away the shadows and whispers that had haunted the night. Her breath came in slow, steady puffs, mist mingling with the cool morning air. The ghostly figures that had gathered beneath the well now shimmered softly, faces clearer, eyes no longer hollow but bright with gratitude. They drifted upward like morning mist, finally free from their centuries-long prison. But Evelyn's eyes caught the movement of one figure, a shadow darker and colder than the rest. It lingered just beyond the circle of light, watching her with a smile that didn't reach its eyes. "You freed their voices," it whispered, the voice like dry leaves scraping stone. "But you awakened me." The ground beneath the well trembled again, and from the dark earth, roots cracked through cobblestones, twisting and writhing like serpents. Evelyn took a step back, clutching the tome tightly. "The darkness grows with silence," the shadow hissed. "If you do not keep the balance, the town will be swallowed whole." Evelyn's fingers curled around the book's spine. "Then I will guard their stories," she said, voice firm. "I will be the keeper of Greymoor's truths." The shadow recoiled, vanishing like smoke, leaving behind an echo of warning. The well sealed itself with a stone slab, as if the earth itself agreed with her vow. Over the following days, Evelyn worked tirelessly, cataloging the stories she had released, writing new ones in the tome, ones of hope, memory, and light. The town slowly stirred, birds returned, the wind carried laughter from unseen corners, and the mist became gentle, a quiet guardian rather than a suffocating shroud. Neighbors appeared too, drawn by a warmth they hadn't felt in years, offering cautious smiles and shared histories. One evening, as Evelyn sat by the fireplace, the tome open on her lap, she heard a soft knock at the door. She opened it to find an old woman with silver hair and eyes like storm clouds. "I see you found your place," the woman said with a smile. Evelyn nodded. "I'm ready now." The woman's smile deepened. "Then Greymoor will live, through you." As the night deepened, Evelyn looked out her window at the now peaceful town. Greymoor's echoes had finally found their home. And so had she.